strategy in its very essence is, well, what's the problem or obstacle or challenge that we need to dedicate a series of actions to then overcome? We have these really strong stakeholder groups saying, well, we want this and we want that, we want this. And so you have this doesn't offend anybody strategy, which doesn't really solve any issues. And the really, really sharp strategies are the ones who make those really hard calls and do the hard thing.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and privileged to have Adrian Smith, the founder and chief executive at BlinkPay, joining us again. How are you, Adrian?
I'm very good, Paul. Very happy to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to have you back on the show. Maybe you can give a quick intro of where you fit into this big wide world of tech in New Zealand for listeners who don't know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So BlinkPay was originally a financial technology company that was founded by Daniel Karihana. It started as BankLinks in 2015 because he had this idea like, there must be an easy way to connect my bills into my banking experience, so some kind of connectivity layer that allows me to better manage my life. And that's where it began. And then what happened was I joined BlinkPay in September 2021, and myself and a guy called Chris Riddle, he was the CTO, we sort of took the company forward when Dan passed away, sadly, in December 2022. And so what we've been doing is we've been trying to build out financial technology capability for New Zealanders, which is, built and made for New Zealand by New Zealanders. So that's what we've been trying to do for the past 10 years. And yes, we work very much in a weird standard called the Open Banking Standard. The name's kind of irrelevant. What does it do? It's a network of capabilities that anyone can plug into that it can be, in theory, quite consistent and reusable across all the major banks. So that's what we've been trying to do since I joined the company.
Fantastic. Well, looking forward to delving into that. Of course, as usual, we've got some pretty fascinating news topics to talk about. And let's start with a big thank you to our show partners, One New Zealand, Spark, 2 Degrees, Workday, Fortinet, and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciate their support. And a quick mention for the High Tech Awards coming up about four weeks or so, 4.5 weeks away from that, taking place at Spark Arena on Friday, 22nd of May. So jump in and get your tickets if you haven't. I'm looking forward to catching up with many of you there. On the New Zealand news front, probably the big one late last week was to hear that, Allbirds, the super cool, funky wool shoes that ended up as a Silicon Valley darling for a little while there, worn by the likes of Obama and all the cool tech and actors and whatnot in the US, has gone through something of a pivot. So a couple of weeks ago, they sold their shoe business, which I guess is what you do when your business has lost sort of over 99% of its value. You find somebody who has a vision for what they could do with that, because probably not particularly exciting for them to keep running a business that was very, very different to what they started. So having effectively divested of the Allbirds shoe brand, they've decided, well, we've got this listed company, got some good ideas, and the idea is to move into AI infrastructure. And so they're looking to get shareholder approval to rebrand to be called New Bird AI. And where I understand from what is very scant information, there's been a single press release. I did try to nudge them for a bit more, if I could have a little bit of a chat and fill in the gaps. But of course, they're a listed company, so they can't say too much other than probably what's public for something so big at the moment. So this focus, AI infrastructure, the way I read it is sitting between the big AI companies and the big hyperscale, cloud providers today, who are, at the top end, I guess, in terms of price-wise and so on, and the option for organisations to own and run their own infrastructure. So sitting between that, they have attracted a $50 million investment to get that kicked off. So quite a fascinating take, Adrian. What's your thoughts? Because I guess BlinkPay very much leveraging AI. That's a key thing that is part of your picture in the background. Do you think there's room in the market for this sort of play? And is $50 million enough to kind of kickstart buying a ton of GPUs and the like?
Yeah, so I think structurally they've identified something, right? Because there's companies that are rising up to fill that gap. Although I would say it's probably mid its maturity cycle. So coming in now with 50 million, like I don't know what the cost of an H100 is, but how many H100 chips can you really get to build up your compute with 50 million, right? And that's not even talking around racks and stacks and centers. So from my perspective, 50 million, that might get you a toehold at best. But I think for me, the really ironic part of all this is Allbirds started with this whole kind of B Corp sustainability argument. And one of the challenges we looked at when we went AI first is my team said, hey, Chief, how do we feel about the amount of energy consumed by AI? Like 10, 12, 20x more than a Google search if we're just doing searches via AI. And that was a conversation we had where we looked at each other and sort of said, are we comfortable with consuming that much energy resource in order to make our business more productive and efficient? Obviously, we went down the productivity and efficiency path, but I find it really interesting. We go from sustainability to the opposite of sustainability, one might argue. I do think, though, that there is lots of GPU-backed financing in the world, like Blackstone and Magneto as well. But high-density data centers, space, that's hard. Like, I don't know if you've been aware of what's been happening in America, but there's been lots of protests around data centers coming in and a lot of arguments that I might say many are irrational and emotional, although there is one around local centers who are using that energy. Suddenly all their prices are going up from the consumption of the data centers. So there needs to be more work done there to try and balance the needs of local communities where data centers go, as well as what are the energy needs of that data center and how can they do it in a meaningful way that doesn't make it really expensive for everyone who lives in the area. So I think, like, historically, do you remember Long Island Iced Tea when they went to long blockchain in 2017?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Big pivot.
Big pivot. And they went up by about 380% off the back of that announcement.
That's right.
Do you remember how many years it took before they got delisted?
It wasn't that long.
It wasn't that long.
I mean, and that one was, Eric Watson, was sort of behind that. And, folks that don't know Eric Watson, you can Google his story, but... I don't, pretty controversial character, shall we say? That was a move that it would be hard to say was kind of covered in good ethics. I would imagine from the folks behind Allbirds that this is probably something with a bit more a lot more substance to it. But as to how hard it is to pull it off and whether this becomes a good long-term play, we need probably a chunk more information than what we've got at the moment. They are going to put it to a shareholder vote. I was once a very small shareholder in Allbirds, and I got out.
There we go.
So won't be involved in that, but. I think it's like at the moment we're very light on the information. We don't even know, as the Kiwi founder Tim Brown, is he part of this future picture? Is it being handed on to to a completely different crew? This is part of that vacuum of information at the moment. So I guess we'll wait and follow this with interest. But I would imagine, and this isn't any sort of insurance investment advice, but I imagine this would be what my friend Darcy Angara of the NZ Everyday Investor would call a spicy investment.
That's the thing. I think that vote in May is going to be critical, right? How much success of this is going to be hinged on, does the vote get across the line or not? And then when I think about it more broadly, I'm like, well, if you distill it into its components, like what are the core competencies and capabilities you built as an organization building sustainable shoes? And how many of those things can translate into GPUs and compute and data centers and racking? And I'm not sure how many cross over neatly. And so,
Well, yeah, I mean, they've divested the entire Allbirds brand, and I imagine that means, probably, there isn't much left in terms of people or anything else. But yes, interesting times ahead.
Interesting times
now,
ahoy.
moving on, Rocket Lab, they have a new product that they've announced really, I guess, over the weekend or end of last week, is Gauss electric thruster. So this is a new move for them to enter the thruster market, and they're talking about the ability to or capacity to build about 200 of these thrusters on an annual basis. I saw an interview that Peter Beck did with Madison over the weekend, and he talked about, hey, they could scale that up to much more, but I guess that's a numbers maybe reflective of what they see the annual opportunity being. These thrusters are, I believe, worth hundreds of thousands each. So yeah, that's another just string to the bow for Rocket Lab, but it also it just starts creating a more and more cohesive picture in terms of what Rocket Lab can do. And of course, we've just recently seen the moon mission, and the Orion capsule was being powered by Rocket Lab solar cells. So they're just getting into more and more elements there. And then the other bit that we heard last week is componentry they use for their small satellites, and how those connect were also used on that launch, I think, to launch some maybe some small sats just as part of the launch. So they're really becoming an end-to-end space company in any way you can describe it.
Yeah, I'd be disingenuous to suggest I know much about what Rocket Lab does, but I do know we're all proud of them, right?
Yeah.
What they've been doing is super cool. And in my limited understanding of this new technology, what it does is it increases payload efficiency, right? Because what you've got is you need a lot less payload in terms of fuel in order to be able to do things with the rockets. And so these electrical systems, as I understand it, allow you to do things that then means it frees up design of satellites. Suddenly you can do things in different ways in rockets because you don't need the same capacity for fuel. You have the ability to do things really powerful and meaningfully. You can have access to orbits that historically we couldn't really do because there was, as I understand it, some of the chemicals in rocket fuel were prohibitive to do certain things at certain levels. Yeah. So it just really opens up all of that human endeavor in that space. And what I also have a limited understanding of, it also increases the precision of control when sort of maneuvering using these engines. So it doesn't matter which way you cut it, right? This is an expansion of Rocket Lab capabilities. And to your point, right, it's now starting to get into a really full-throated, fully serviced, this is how we do rockets and this is how we do it the Kiwi way. Super cool, right?
Yeah. Really exciting. Great explanation, by the way.
Thanks.
Our new in-house rocket scientist.
No, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just a tech guy.
Now, also in the space area, it's been interesting with Blue Origin and their launches that they've been doing recently, because they've got their New Glenn rocket, and at the end of the weekend, New Zealand time, we saw Blue Origin launching their third New Glenn rocket, and this is their new humongous reusable rocket. And the booster, you could see the footage and see that come into to land, or the first stage there, land on a platform. Everything was looking really, really good, but unfortunately, looks like that they released the payload, which was the AST Space Mobile's Bluebird 7 satellite earlier than anticipated. So it didn't actually get to where they were aiming to put it. Now, this will be disappointing news for some, because 2 Degrees customers are looking forward to these Bluebird satellites being up in space, and there being a sufficient constellation, because they will be providing mobile to satellite connectivity for those who are outside of normal coverage around New Zealand, and for a pretty big percentage of telcos around the world. So these satellites from AST Space Mobile are really the competition for mobile networks and mobile users to Starlink, and providing that ubiquitous capability for folks that are away from a normal cell site. But the big claim to fame is that these are absolutely massive satellites. I think sort of tennis court size they fold out to be, and they will be able to use a lot less satellites than what Starlink offer, because they're purely focused on mobile connectivity, and because of the size and scale and the other elements of their technology, they are indicating they'll deliver broadband type speeds from space. So much more capacity, so you'll be able to do your usual things, whether it's watching videos, uploading, downloading files, and so on, right from a mobile once the constellation is complete. Their CEO and co-founder has indicated that AST Space Mobile are still on track to launch around 45 satellites into orbit this year. So it's probably more of a blip on their journey, one would hope, than completely throwing them off track.
Yeah, so forgive me, I don't understand. How many satellites do they need to be sort of up and running to have the kind of coverage and consistency that they're looking for?
I mean, I think with the 45, they will be in a really good position.
Well, that's materially less than Starlink, isn't it?
Oh, massively left, absolute fraction, and potentially even less, because the talk from them and from 2 Degrees has been around sort of service coming online, potentially around mid this year. So that's before they get even 45 into orbit. So I guess it'll depend on where you are, and there'll be varying other aspects to what's practical, or whether it's initially a sort of a partial service if you've got one that's flying over, not enough to keep complete contiguous sort of coverage across the board.
Yeah, so if you take a pro Kiwi view, which obviously we do, like
100%.
If you are living in those rural areas where there's very little coverage, like I live in a paddock in Te Teko, and I live right on the edge of the 4G network, which refreshes. I don't know when it refreshes, but all I know is I'll have signal, and then I'll lose all signal for a period of time until it refreshes and the network starts up again.
Yeah, okay.
And so when we had the recent cyclone and power is out, I was like, I can't work, I can't do anything. So the ability to have some coverage is definitely a step forward, right? And I can imagine, like in those scenarios where you're out at sea or there's something going on. Like I know when we on the jet skis, you're encouraged to have a mobile phone as well as the VAF radios, whatever they are. Yeah. But if you had the ability to have satellite coverage where you could use your phone anywhere, that would materially make things a lot better from a safety and being able to find people perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big opportunities of this type of offering. And of course, we now have both Spark and 1NZ in the market with Starlink's offering, which gives connectivity and now even calling via WhatsApp. So that's already out there for those that are outside of those coverage areas at times. But of course, great for there to be competition in the market as well.
I think so as well. Now, with the satellite not reaching the required height, Does that mean what's going to happen? Does it have to be deorbited? Or
so they've got
okay.
to deorbit it, and I guess that gets probably largely burnt up on re-entry. I would imagine. I don't think they're built in such a way that they'd be surviving that.
Yeah, because the alternative, right, is we can't have satellites just floating around in space because obviously you then run the risk of collisions and a cascade effect, right? If suddenly there's this whole pinball thing going on, sort of our satellite
huge
coverage network.
space debris issues,
so
which are already a challenge. So
I remember hearing on a podcast a few years ago how there was one company looking to clean up the space junk, and then it made me think about, I can't remember that Kiwi sort of show back in the 80s where the song, the title was Space Junk, and they were out there cleaning up space junk. I'm like, that could be a credible business model, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the Kiwis looked into the future back then and realised there's going to be a problem one day. We should really figure this out.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is who pays for it. How do you make that work? But I believe that it has the potential to become a really, really big issue. So, it certainly had a fair bit of thought and some experimentation going on in terms of ability to, capture some of that space debris.
Yeah, I think we can all agree though, right? If we've got more coverage for more Kiwis being able to do things and stay connected from a health and safety and all of those good reasons, then I don't think anyone's going to disagree that that's a good thing, right?
Look, I think that we will probably miss some of the old days where you were away from a phone or away from coverage, and you had that peacefulness. I used to like getting on a plane to San Francisco, and it was like, unplugged from anything. You time to think. Of course, there are other ways to do that now, and you don't have to connect to the Wi-Fi when you're on board a plane, and you don't have to have your phone on when you're outside of coverage. So it just becomes a personal choice now, right? And that you can still then utilize it should an emergency situation arise.
I do like the idea of a digital detox being imposed on you though, right, by lack of coverage.
Yeah.
Because some of us need to have it imposed. All right.
Yeah. Now, on to sort of more the international news. It caught my attention that, and this was published in Tom's Hardware, but a Dutch journalist demonstrated quite a security flaw that maybe military hadn't thought about, certainly hadn't worked out a way to address. And he mailed a Bluetooth tracker to somebody aboard a Dutch Navy warship, and basically was able once it reached the warship to start tracking the ship. So I thought, that's a fascinating case. I mean, we've heard of things in the past like military compounds being revealed due to members of the armed forces exercising and wearing their Fitbit, and then that information appearing on a map because so many people were walking around the perimeter or going for a run around the perimeter of a particular complex that suddenly that's enough data to start appearing on the Fitbit maps and or on the data that they publish. So this is just another one of those sort of unintended consequences that I guess armed forces will have to think about.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of stuff like that, right? Because, obviously the Bluetooth tracker, if there's nothing the Bluetooth can ping off of, then obviously the ability to track is greatly diminished. But in that scenario, clearly there was options. When I think about what are the different unintended consequences or ways to exploit, I don't know if you've seen the latest article from Anthropic, but they're not going to release the latest version because they said when they put it to work on cybersecurity and the amount of exploits it found in no time at all, they're like, actually, we're going to hold this back because we feel like if we release this into the wild, we could bring economies, we could bring things to their knees. So these are the things where we have to be thoughtful as a technology community, right? Like, just because you can, should you, might be a useful question to ask ourselves. Yeah. Because there's some things where you're just like, I can do this really cool thing. Like obviously the Americans can be quite alarmist. I heard one podcast refer to it as the New Manhattan Project. I'm like, well, hang on. I don't know if it's that bad, but admittedly, we haven't seen enough of it to actually be able to make that evaluation. But
yeah, we did talk a little bit about Mythos or Mythos.
Yeah.
Last week, and also the work that they're doing to use that to kind of look at existing code bases and help companies get that up to scratch and get open source up to scratch and address the vulnerabilities that it's finding. But these are new challenges that we have to deal with as a society.
Yes, on that point, right? So I get the logic around open source, but it depends on how deeply embedded things are. Like, if I was being able to use Mythos and then I was going to try and evaluate all of the fraud and the exploits that it finds in the internet, like, you couldn't fix them overnight. Like, I know that what they suggest, they're going to go into like a workshop and they're going to do something for like N number of months and then find these things and fix them. But I think there's so many things that are deeply embedded, it's problematic. And I think probably the easiest corollary for me since I came from banking is everyone's like, oh yeah, let's upgrade the mainframe. It'll be easy. It'll be great. And the trouble with that is you've got so many things that have been built on top of, layered on, and the ability to just rip that out and put a new thing in, very, 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 very hard. And my suspicion is a lot of these exploits that Mythos has found, is going to discover that it's core and essential to capabilities. Like, one of the conversations we have at BlinkPay is off the back of the sort of screen scraping being signaled by the Commerce Commission that it's going to be, they expect all the major banks to block access to that. We started looking at, well, who does data? And we started looking at folks like Ilian, who does the statements. We looked at InvestNet, Yodlee, Akahu, and others. And what we realized that if you're in the credit space, the screen scraping solution is so deeply embedded into the process, like, oh, we're not going to be able to prize those out and say, here's a different data source that's supported. There's actually quite a bit of effort to unpick that stuff. And that is my suspicion of, even if we have the ability to identify all these exploits, can we really rebuild them in months, as has been suggested by the team at Anthropic? I'm not convinced of that.
Yeah, look, I don't think this is going to be easy. Some of it, probably not achievable. And look, you'd be familiar because BlinkPay's owned by a bank now, right? You're owned by BNZ. You would have, I'm sure, over this last period, become quite familiar with the challenges in modernising and securing the technology within large financial organisations. And I think from the things I hear, they're not always in the perfect state, shall we say? Let's be, if we're being honest, we'd probably go a little bit more, extreme on that. These technologies have been built, over decades and decades. Changing and modernising and securing every aspect is often a lot easier, talked about than actually, executed upon. I think you raise an incredibly valid point there, Adrian.
I can tell you from first-hand experience, looking at the stuff in British banking, and when you look at the spaghetti junction of systems and how they're sort of being plumbed together, and you'll say to your solution architects, so if we pull that out, what'll happen? They're like, oh, don't pull on that thread, boss. Why? We're not entirely sure what'll happen. It was like those old jokes, right? Like, you pull on the handbrake and then suddenly the glove box and the ladder opens and the light's on. You're like, what happened there? In banking, there's a lot of stuff like that where you don't really know what it is. And sometimes, I did make some decisions where I was like, all right, let's be brave and just turn it off and see who screams because we don't know. And we did that with a few systems, but it's quite terrifying when you look at it and go, how the heck do we meaningfully transform this core banking capability that's built on a language, COBOL, where you have to get people out of retirement to come in and do the coding. Yeah. So that stuff is slightly disconcerting. And then when I sort of overlay that on what's going on with sort of Mythos and what they're suggesting in some of the things in the world, like if you think of the internet, which grew out of nothing in the 90s to what it is today, and if you think about all the things that have been layered on top of some of those vulnerabilities and exploits, like, oh, it feels like a house of cards if you pull too many threads. Just one person's opinion.
Yes. Yeah. Well, having spent that time in the UK, you would have seen some interesting things. I did a little bit of work for one of the UK banks for NatWest, just as a little contract. when I was travelling to do with Y2K, and anyone under a certain age will have to Google what that is. But a particular computer challenge we were all concerned about with the turn into the new millennium, and it was a fascinating experience. Put it that way, and I turned up some things on this particular project, and it was like, well, somebody had a particular mandate to do a particular thing, and some extra things were raised. They're like, she'll be right. Just do the bit that's on the list. We'll tick that off and we'll move on. So there you go.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do need to make these hard decisions, and we do need to unplug things, turn them off, change them, flip to new technologies. But yes, you can't always actually make those moves without causing some damage.
Yeah, exactly right. But that's the heart of strategy, right? Strategy in its very essence is, well, what's the problem or obstacle or challenge that we need to dedicate a series of actions to then overcome? And we're going to have to make some hard choices, because that's what strategy is. We're going to have to choose between what are the things we're going to do and what's the logic for that. What are the things we're not going to do? One of the greatest challenges I observe in strategy in all the various organizations I've sort of come across in my lifetime is we have these really strong stakeholder groups saying, well, we want this and we want that, we want this. And so you have this blended, really amorphous, doesn't offend anybody strategy, which doesn't really solve any issues. And the really, really sharp strategies, at least in my humble opinion, are the ones who make those really hard calls and do the hard thing, because they're trying to amplify or create some kind of advantage that will then hopefully be a good situation for that organization or that company in the future. And where strategy is absent and lacking, or bad strategies, is when we don't seem to be able to make those hard calls.
And you have to be able to make the hard calls. They have to, they will often have some pain, which is why they don't get made, right? But you actually have to be able to face the pain to be able to get out the other side. Otherwise, you face bigger pain, because you might not be around any longer, for instance, right?
And that's the trick, right? Then holding your nerve.
Yeah, good stuff. Last on the news front, GoPro have announced a completely new direction in their cameras. So, we think of GoPro as action cameras, and of course, people will put them to a range of other uses. But now we're seeing them morph. So they've launched a whole new series of cameras. They're calling the Mission 1 series. These are cameras capable of recording up to 8K, and they're going to have three different models coming into the market this year. Mission 1 Pro, so that's their I guess their kind of core offering, which is a 4K or 8K cinematic camera. It uses their new silicon, their new processor, to be able to actually operate at 8K. It's got this much bigger sensor, a 1-inch sensor, so it can bring in a lot more light. So that creates situations where it's useful in a broader range of situations. Shooting at night and so on. 50 megapixel photographs as well, and then they've got a whole raft of different, frames per second sort of options. So they can do 60 frames per second at 8K, 240 frames per second on 4K video, and then they can do, shorter bursts in 1080p or full HD video at 960 frames per second. So that could be a lot of fun to play with if you're wanting to capture, bullets in flight, or other things that would happen at an incredible pace. So fascinating to see this new move. Of course, this comes as GoPro have really been struggling because of competition, particularly from DJI, probably especially, and also Insta with their Insta360 cameras. They're also launching a model with an interchangeable lens. So this will be a more premium offering, and it will allow use of micro 4/3 lenses, which are are common out there and can be used across a whole range of cameras, but still a very small form factor camera. And then they'll have an entry level version which will be limited to 4K rather than 8K. And they're launching a wireless mic system as well. So this is a pivot for a company. I guess in not quite the sort of pivot we're talking about with Allbirds. They're not completely moving into a whole different business, but they are going to be targeting a different set of customers rather than just those that are jumping out of aeroplanes and doing action sports and so on. So they're hoping that this will make them a relevant customer for the next decade or two ahead.
Yeah, so when I was reading the article, as you were speaking, the thing that jumped out to me is it feels like it's a bit of an upgrade in terms of luxury and capability. But I couldn't see pricing. I was only scanning, but I didn't see pricing. And so I guess my first question is it going to be like a really luxury end of market situation, or will it be accessible? Like, it has the starter option. Like, can the average consumer be able to purchase one of those and do that kind of filming and that capability? That's the part I
think this will be a more premium purchase. So they're hoping, I think, to expand to a bigger market. There are a lot of people who like to create content or like to get good video. I guess in the same way, if we look across, say, mobile phones, it's the top end mobile phones that get that premium price, and in part because of great video and great photography type of capabilities. So this takes them out of being a backwards and forwards kind of competition with the likes of DJI, who being a Chinese company, tend to have access to sort of lower cost research and development and so on, potentially repositions them in a way where they get a second chance at having a future. But how that plays out and whether the prices end up being too premium is, I guess, time will tell. But I guess when you put it in that sort of, smartphone type context, a lot of people are spending, north of 1,000, north of 2,000, some cases north of 3,000 New Zealand dollars on a smartphone. So, if your dedicated camera that you're going to attach to your car, to your boat, that you're going to use for creating content, you're going to use for this broader range of capabilities is something that you want, then folks might be willing to spend a bit more, especially when there's not these other players that are right there, either copying their every move or getting ahead of them in some areas and outmaneuvering them, and usually at lower price points. And that's what's made it so hard for them. When it was just DJI, I think they were in a good place. But when there's so much competition, that's become very difficult for them.
Yeah, because when I think about it, I think about content creators, and they're using smartphones by and large. And so I'm not as familiar with the group who are doing all that really crazy stuff, although I'm assuming that I think about it a little bit. It'll like the folks who like doing all the jumping between buildings and roofs and diving through holes and all that sort of stuff. And is that market large enough to sustain this change and approach from GoPro? Hard to say, because I know in the beginning I worked with a guy called Tim, and he was all about the GoPro life. He had them on ski helmets, and they were just constantly recording runs. Yeah. And is there, in this modern day and age, is there a small group of folks, a little diaspora, who want to have a separate camera situation and be able to do that sort of thing? And is that sub-segment, will they be financial enough to be able to afford these premium capabilities?
Well, and potentially it's the sort of gear that would get used in a studio like ours, right? So there are a lot of scenarios for it, or people want that kind of more cinematic kind of view when they're doing a webinar or all sorts of things. So there are potential places for these things to get used. Or as your webcam, do you want something fancier that sort of attaches to your computer that gives you that cinematic look without a big beastly camera. So I'm curious how this plays out. I saw some of the small Blackmagic cameras recently. So they're one of the other camera manufacturers, and they've got these really small cameras, probably not. Well, yeah, probably in the GoPro type size, but that you can attach a high-end lens to. And so, there are markets for different types of cameras, but whether GoPro will be the winner and whether, look, their cameras are too far away from the action cam type capabilities that they end up losing their existing customer base. Because if that happens, then you're kind of you're really starting from scratch, right?
Yeah, it's the nature of business these days, right? You've got lots of hard competition, lots of stuff that can be easily copied very quickly by highly motivated, state actors. Let's go with that.
Well, time to talk about BlinkPay.
Let's go.
And, let's catch up. So maybe you can tell us a little bit. Some folks would have listened in last time you were on the show. I think late 2024 type time frame. But some won't have. So maybe sort of paint the picture of of the background. You give us a quick intro at the beginning, but really what BlinkPay has been doing in recent years and how the acquisition has played out for you.
Yeah, so I won't repeat what I said at the start around what Daniel Aotearoa originally set out to do. He had this notion of, can I make it really easy to put your bills into your banking experience and put your bills in the same place you manage your finances? And so he set out to create an infrastructure company that could be a connection or an integration layer between billers and the major banks. That's where he started. And then along the way, funded in December 2019, and then COVID hit March 2020, and suddenly all the memorandums of understanding and letters of intent from the major banks, everyone went, oof, bigger fish to fry, bro. Understandably so, right? During COVID, crazy times. And so at the same time, though, the team had been evaluating the open banking standard that the industry was trying to build because it was built on application programming interfaces or APIs. I'm going to assume the audience of this podcast, not APIs are, so I won't bore people with a redundant sort of example. And so realizing that there was a lot of commonality between the API native platform he was building and what was going on with open banking APIs. Open banking, for the avoidance of doubt, came from the UK, where out of the Payment Service 2 directive out of Europe, the European Parliament sort of said, hey, we think there's a lot of value locked up in banks and data and payments, and so we wanted to make that available and open up banking. And so open banking was a byproduct of all of that legal stuff that was going on in Europe. And so New Zealand was looking at UK and Europe, going, hey, there's some good stuff here we could potentially bring into the country. And so along the way, BlinkPay said, all right, well, we've got one horse that we really like, Blink Bills, but let's get a second horse in the race. Let's do this open banking standard, since it's not a huge leap for us to move into open banking APIs. And then about the time that we chatted, we'd just finished being acquired by the Bank of New Zealand in November of 2024. And so for us, from our perspective, it was like, we went from startup with short capital runways going, oh my God, how do we stay in the game? A lot of people use the overused trope of when you do a startup, you dive off a cliff and then try and assemble a plane before hitting the ground. We chose to assemble a glider to glide as far as we could while we're building engines. So that's the analogy we used. And so when a serious bank comes along and says, hey, we believe in you and we think what you're doing for the country is really, really cool, and we'd like to be a part of that journey. Like, it's pretty hard to say, yeah, sounds cool, why not? So that happened in 2024. So suddenly we had capital certainty, which was brilliant. At its heart, though, we're still a Māori-founded, New Zealand-built company, still trying to build infrastructure that sits at the heart and then at the centre of how New Zealand pays or shifts data around as quickly as they can. So we're very much into the efficient transfer of data and payments. And we very much like to be the connecting tissue or the plumbing or whatever analogy you like that sort of says we're connecting these guys over here with these folks over here. So that's us.
Great. Now, how does the open banking now being sort of, something formalised that, everyone has to be a part of, how does that change the picture compared to how BlinkPay was operating before open banking was enforced, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to the Customer and Product Data Act being brought into legislation last year and then being brought into legally enacted in December of last year, it was the financial services industry of New Zealand was a coalition of the willing of sorts. You had the major banks and a bunch of enthusiastic third parties and a bunch of other stakeholder groups, regulators and whatnot, trying to figure out how do we shepherd the industry towards this open banking standard network. And so prior to the Customer and Product Data Act, which brought it into law, you had a lot of stuff where we negotiated everything on a case-by-case basis. And sometimes the loudest voice won, or sometimes the person who was most resistant or the group of most resistant slowed everything down. The moment it became codified in law, where banking and open banking in particular was the first target sector under the Customer and Product Data Act, suddenly the fancy end of town sat up and said, oh, this thing you're doing is legal, it's government backed. And so suddenly we had a lot of conversations with the fancy end of town, which has been great, to be honest. More
What
demand.
do you mean the fancy end of town?
Well,
Yeah, right.
those well-known logos and brands that people love to put on their logo wall when they're trying to sell you their services.
Yeah.
And so for those, just a quick précis on Customer and Product Data Act. It's a really brilliant piece of legislation. Around the world, it's known as the CDR regime, or Customer Data Regime, Customer Data Right. And what it is under the law, your data held by a business is your data, and it goes beyond just your personal identifiable information like Paul Spain, live at such and such address, this is your mobile number. It also goes into the product holdings you have with that particular business, as well as the activity you do with that product. Now, if you can imagine from a banking perspective, if you look at someone's transactional accounts and you can see what's happening transactionally, that's an awful lot of power. You can start to do things like, well, actually, with your consent, Paul, I can verify when your income comes in. We can see if there's regular occurring direct credits to your account, on what cadence and for how much. And we could probably confirm with a degree of certainty with your consent, this is when you get paid and this is how much you get paid. We can do that if we're in a lending institution. And so underneath the Customer and Product Data Act, banking was first. Really cool. Your data, you can go to any bank who's in scope and say, hey, I would really like you to send my banking data over to this accredited requester over here. So an accredited requester underneath the Customer and Product Data Act is someone who's gone through the MBIE onboarding program, and candidly, their security profile they took really serious. It's the highest bar I've personally witnessed in my entire career.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very high. So hats off to the MBIE team. They took that really seriously. I'd hoped it'd be a little bit easier. It was not. And so to be an accredited requester, you had to provide evidence of, like, the list is long and exhaustive of the security things you need to do. And it's really good. But because we, as a function of being ISO 27001 certified, we had all the evidence. We had policies we could point at. We had how we embedded into our systems. We had procedures. And then because we have external audits, we're able to provide that evidence of what have we done and how have we proved it and how we tested it. And we do all sorts of things. And of course, as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bank of New Zealand, there's a bunch of other obligations that we have, which all they do is increase our security posture. So it's a very long way of saying the Customer and Product Data Act has brought about with it a lot of interesting things that are now unlocking the market. And so what is the next step for the Customer and Product Data Act? Well, then Minister Simpson said at the start of the year that energy is the next sector, and he was looking to bring it in September of this year. So I'm sure the energy sector has some views on that, but it was indicated by the minister that he'd expect energy utilities like a Genesis, etc., to be able to make connectable their technology stack to accredited requesters. So if you're a customer of Genesis and you say, hey, Genesis, I'd really like to get my data out via these guys, BlinkPay, because they're going to help me find better deals on my energy, etc. Underneath the law, if that part becomes ratified as they have to be in by a certain date, then they're going to have to. They won't have much of a choice. They'll have 5 working days to respond to those requests.
Wow. So in that sort of case, if you were wanting to change power companies, which of course, there is help for changing power companies in New Zealand,
Yep.
But it's complicated because of the data that each individual, has access to, right? And so that would allow you then to get a much more accurate kind of quote or pricing, or even run your entire last year's worth of power use through and see, well, if that were to repeat the next year, who would be your best one to be with? That's
So
great.
You can have a really informed conversation. You could go to your sort of your energy company and say, hey, look, based on my the patterns of when I use energy and whatnot, how might we structure my particular and tailor my billing scenario to determine peaks and troughs and smoothing stuff out and all the rest of it? And so you get far more tailored solutions, which would hopefully cost you a lot less money. But also you have the ability to plug into marketplaces who might facilitate the connections from all the energy suppliers, so you can then find the best solution based on your personal circumstance. So what this does is it introduces a lot of power and gets a lot of power and control back to you, the end consumer. So we think this is great. We think this is really great. And the really cool part of what we did with open banking, that'll then hopefully we'll try and apply more broadly to every energy sector that comes into focus, eventually will be utilities, insurers, etc., is you have a common standard that then everyone then designs to, which makes the connectivity and the experience, well, a lot more consistent, which would then hopefully build trust and confidence in the system for consumers and end users. So we feel like this is an awesome thing for New Zealand.
Oh, that's exciting. So if you look at sort of, I guess, recent achievements for BlinkPay, what really stands out? What are you most proud of in recent times?
What are we most? Actually, do you mind if I tweak that to recent successes and challenges as well? Because I think the challenge is a big angle on that one.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So prior to the Customer and Product Data Act, probably the biggest challenge was product and bank coverage, because it was a little bit kind of, well, here's what we can do and here's what we won't do by the various major banks. And they had their reasons. But underneath the Customer and Product Data Act, there's a really strong, this is the standard, these are the things that are in scope. And by doing that, it allows us to really build out our consistent approach to how we handle those different products and the different types of products we can build off the back of that, which is super cool. So prior to the Customer and Product Data Act, that was challenging.
What were some of the things that maybe you couldn't do with one entity that you could do with another that was quite important?
Yeah, so as an example, when the open banking standard first came out, the ability to do one-off immediate payments, it was pretty clear, at least in my read of the standards, that if someone is using a desktop on the web, you'd be able to redirect them to another web desktop site to connect to the bank and then do all those things. So the customer's staying in session, in an experience, they don't have to context switch at all. Whereas two of the banks went, we don't think we agree with that. And so even though everyone else is saying, yep, this is happening, two of them were like, no, it's not really happening for us. And so suddenly we had a whole bunch of folks saying, hey, why can't I access my bank when I'm doing this at my laptop or computer? Where are they? And so we had those kind of slightly disparate sort of journeys, which made it really, really challenging conversations to have. And then you go sit down with a potential client and say, oh, we can do this, except for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P caveats, which is not a particularly strong sales conversation to have. And so there was stuff like that. There were some banks that did stuff really cool, and we said, hey, this is a really cool pattern. You guys should do that as well. I'm like, no. We do things our own way. And so as an experience, if you're trying to do a particular payment type like a decoupled flow, so within the decoupled flow, you have the ability to push a payment to a customer's banking app from anywhere. So it doesn't have to be same session, doesn't have to be app to app, doesn't have to be, so like it might be a farmer's market, you wander up, you want to buy some honey. The lady's like, the vendor says, hey, yep, this will be $20. If you give me your mobile number, I can push it to your banking app, you can just pay for it that way. And so some chose different mechanisms or proxy identifiers to be able to do that. So like, in your case, we can use a mobile number. Oh, who do you bank with? Oh, then we're going to need all of this information to facilitate a payment for $20. And then they look at you like, what? And so prior to the Customer Product Data Act, that stuff was challenging. Post, I'm happy to report that we're in a very good place where our biggest issue is actually trying to keep pace with the amount of attention from enterprise merchants. It's been really, really cool. There's a real genuine curiosity of, well, how can this stuff that's been going on for years, it's now backed by legislation, how can it improve our operational performance? And how can we reduce some of our stickier pain points? So that part's been really cool. And as discussed already, another massive challenge for us was the consistency across the experience, because inconsistent experiences can undermine consumer confidence. So that stuff, those are kind of, they were pre-challenges. We're now now that we're on the other side of that, that stuff's slowly working itself out. In terms of the successes and challenges, our transaction volume was up year on year by about 179%, which was up on the previous year, which was well over 300%. So there is demand.
It's good.
It's
That's
happening.
good. Yeah.
As discussed, we're live and we've almost got a fully rounded out set of, we've got the 4 major banks on, and we've managed to get that consistency and harmonization across the different capabilities from those banks. So that's super cool. Probably our first customer that we talked about an awful lot was our reference customer, Sharesies. And in the very first month with us, they saw a 97% growth in average deposit size. It was in a case study that we shared publicly, and a 15% lift in revenue per investor. That was in the first month. We've been at it for a few years with them now. It's materially better, but that's what we got right at the start when we only had 2 banks.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Another thing
What were the 2 banks you started with?
So our first bank we signed with was the Bank of New Zealand. They basically said, look, we've invested a lot of time and effort in this, and we'd like to work with you guys because you guys seem like you are pretty enthusiastic and you might know what you're doing. And so BNZ was first, and then about 5 or 6 months later, we then signed Westpac.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are the 2 early adopters of the open banking standard, which is really cool.
Yep.
Westpac had already built their own proprietary APIs, but they were like, we get it, so we want to join in and see how this goes. So we're very much the guinea pig. Another area that's been really interesting to us from a success perspective, we're heavily penetrated in gold exchanges. Didn't see that coming. So we had 3 gold exchanges who use our services.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if you're looking to go buy gold, and typically, if you don't find our brand somewhere in the checkout, then we've missed a trick somewhere. But the gold exchange was really interesting. But
Why do you think that is?
Oh, because our initial position when Dan was still with us, he looked at the market and he said, if you're in screen scraping, they're charging about 1%. But it was uncapped at the time. He said, look at credit cards. It's depending on which kind of card scheme you're with, it's anywhere from 1.2 up to sort of 2.9, 3.5% if it's external cards. So like, right, well, if we're going to be looking to compete head on with screen scraping, we need to be priced around there so we're a credible alternative. So we started out at 0.95% and we had a capped amount at $3. And so suddenly if it is north of, I can't remember the maths anymore, but once you get above a certain average ticket value, then you know that the fee's capped at $3. So if your average transaction value on your platform's $1,400, well, you know the fee's always $3. And so obviously the gold exchange, even fractional gold investment, still has a hefty price tag.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we got some relatively good cut through with the investment platforms as well as the gold exchanges, because we've signed on another investment platform recently. We've got a few other active ones in the pipeline, and it's pretty cool.
Interesting. Now, one thing we've talked about, haven't talked about it for a long time, online FPOS.
Yes.
You would be somewhat competing with their sort of offering, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So what would you say is maybe the top 1 or 2 differences between the 2? Because I remember doing, I think I did, maybe it was over the weekend, a transaction, and I remember it kind of coming up with which bank you're with and put in your mobile number.
Yeah.
And doing that, and that was there was a lower fee or maybe no fee on that platform for doing that versus credit card.
Yeah. So before I launch into the competitive differences, we will doff our cap to Worldline on FPOS because they blaze this trail when no one else is really looking at it. So it took them 7-8 years to sign the major banks, but they did it off their own back with not a huge amount of industry support. So we doff the cap. They are the OGs of doing this stuff. So first we'll give them credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
Then I look at sort of what's happening today. So I'm sure you're aware that there was an announcement that an Australian outfit is going to be acquiring Paymark. So originally Worldline were owned by a French outfit, and now they're going to be owned by an Australian outfit. But it suggests to me, similar to our acquisition, that there is some international interest in the New Zealand scene, which suggests there's value here. So that's something. In terms of your original question, what are the differences? So with Worldline FPOS, they handle settlements in a slightly different way. So we do all of our transactions in near real time. So if you make a transaction through us, it'll basically, the payments are revocable and then the funds will hit your account within sort of 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on which bank's sending and receiving. Worldline, to the best of our knowledge, still operates settlement accounts, and they will settle those funds and send them the following day.
Okay.
And so, obviously, if you're a treasury function, like, and you're interested in speed to cash, I'm like, no, I want it now. I don't want to wait till tomorrow. I don't want you calculating interest that I could be calculating.
Yeah.
So that's one of the major ones. And then the second one is a lot of their initial efforts were built on, because they did it themselves, were proprietary APIs. Whereas the open banking standard, everyone's gunning towards a common standard. And so Worldline, they're going to be transitioning from their proprietary APIs into the open banking space where appropriate. They're still going to maintain some proprietary APIs because they have some banks who aren't currently available. But that's probably the main one, is they're going to have to do some refactoring work to move to the open banking standard. And between the acquisition, I'm sure there's going to be some activity that ties them up. But yes, they were first, and we give them full credit for that.
Good stuff. So, Adrian, I guess the thing is we've got lots and lots of different ways of being able to make payments, being able to, move funds around, whether it's, paying a mate back for, something that they've paid for, be it an investment sort of deposit, and, millions of transactions kind of, in between there every day. What would you say are really the benefits of using BlinkPay, whether it's for a consumer or for a business, versus, traditional mechanisms?
I'm going to start from a business perspective because we're a B2B to C company. So I'll start with the B and then go to the C, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Cool. So if you are a business that cares about recurring revenue or recurring payments, and you're drowning in direct debit dishonors, then we're who you want to talk to, right? You know the drill. If you're dealing with direct debit dishonors, depending on your level of automation, it could be anywhere from minutes to upwards of 5 to 9 hours of back office work per dishonor run. Reusing code, triage, reversing receipts, representation of decisions, customer comms. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Manual reconciliation. And then obviously as the volume scales, so does the amount of headcount required to sort of resolve all that. For us, AutoPay, Blink AutoPay, we resolve that whole workflow. We have no dishonor file. There are no reusing codes. There's no representations. If there's insufficient funds, we'll just get an API rejection saying, there's insufficient funds. And we handle the smart retry, so we can help determine when you want to do those retries. We can tie it to paydays if you want. What we can also do is we can actually check that there's a confirmation of funds in the account before the request to pull the funds from it. We call it the fence at the top of the cliff. And so if you're about to do a big run and basically say, right, tomorrow we're going to get all these funds from people, with their consent, we can then go check poll all those accounts and say, hey, actually, these 8 over here, Paul, they have insufficient funds. You may want to pre-notify them just to make sure they have sufficient balance so there's no issues. So we're trying to basically build a whole bunch of guardrails around that. And when it fails, the dishonor on all the back office operations, you have to deal with that. From a consumer perspective, some banks will charge you for the dishonor, and they'll charge you for the unplanned overdraft, and they'll charge you, and you circle the drain, which is why many New Zealanders don't want to do dishonors, because if you're not financially able, that can send people down sort of the drain, and that's not the kind of way we want to run things, right? And so we've found if you're utilities, insurers, and telcos and lenders, this one's pretty hard, and so they're like, ears prick up, like, can we talk? I'm like, yeah, we can talk. What are you talking about? So that's one of the ones where we think we do a pretty decent job over the traditional payment methods. Another one is if card interchange is eating your margin. So because our fee structure is very, very different to the card schemes, and let's be clear, there's a lot of reasons why the card scheme fees are as high as they have. They have things like fraud guarantees and chargeback capabilities and consumer guarantees. So, you pay for that privilege. It's an important one. But for us, like, if you're processing $100,000 a month on our starter plan, on our plus plan, we would charge you about $669 in fees. Now, if you're on Stripe, it's about $2,950 in fees because their published rate is 2.65 plus 30 cents. So That's 77% cheaper on transactions every month with faster settlement, right? Because we do the settlement within minutes to hours, within 2 hours. Whereas with card schemes, it's T+2. And in some cases, with some of these card producers, it can be up to T+5, depending on the nature of the relationship. So for us, it's not just a feature of what we can build in our payment gateway. It's real dollars back in your pocket for the business.
No, that's good. It's good. Yeah.
Another one where if you're relying on screen scraping, so we've covered this a little bit today, right? We said the Commerce Commission.
So screen scraping, this is when whoever the provider is effectively logs in as you through a browser, a virtual browser, and then pulls all the data off the screen because there isn't an API to do it in a nice, safe, tidy way, and you're probably breaking your commitments with your bank by giving access to your username and password to whoever's doing the screen scraping as well, right?
Yeah, so for those who are unfamiliar with screen scraping, what you do is you notice it when you go to make your payment, and they say, please give us your online banking login and password or access code or whatever it is. And then you do that, and then they've got a computer program that programmatically pretends to be you to log into your banking environment to do that transactional activity. That introduces a lot of risk into the ecosystem. Some folks say, hey, there's no issues ever recorded. But if you're in a big bank, you know there are issues. You know there are. And that's not widely shared for a bunch of reasons because the banks don't want to disclose if they've got challenges with that or not. But for us, because there's been the signal from the Comcom that says, hey, we expect the major banks to start block access from June this year and see it through to the end of this year, everyone who's relying on screen scraping, there's now a very narrow window where you can do something about that. Not meaning to sound alarmist, but pretty soon you're going to notice your customers are going to start complaining about the things they can't do. One salient right now example, if you're using the WinCave account-to-account solution, ANZ's no longer a choice you can select, which for all of those paying attention at home know that's the largest consumer bank. And that'll only get worse over time. And so there's a window where we can be thoughtful and act now. And so we're having conversations with folks who are saying, suddenly the folks who provide all of our data, they're telling us they can't. Can you help us with your access to data? And so that's another area where we think we're doing pretty well. We're having a lot of really cool conversations. I've got two more, I promise. Another one where we think we do pretty well is if you're chasing late payments and it's a constant tax on your team. And so our request to payments pay service sends a pre-filled payment request straight into your mobile banking app, and it takes about 10 seconds to approve the payment, and then it gets automatically settled on the other end. It gets reconciled. No reminder emails, no phone chases, no manual matching. And because the consent is available for 6 to 10 minutes, it's pretty much a synchronous payment collection method. So we've seen it work best if people are on the phone saying, hey, Paul, just a reminder, you're a little bit late on your mobile phone payment.
Would never happen.
Never happen.
Never happen.
Yes, especially if you're a sponsor of the show. Yeah, so stuff like that. And then the last one where we're finding a lot of really excellent conversations at the moment is if people are making integration decisions that they want to live with. Some are looking at short-term solutions to ongoing problems, but what we do is through a single API connection, we give you access to our full suite of payments and data capabilities. So our one-off payment facility Pay Now, our recurring payment facility Auto Pay, our mobile push request to pay solution, the confirmation of account, confirmation of balance, confirmation of your identity, we can do that as well. That's all available, live transaction data, all out the box, one integration, one vendor, one set of credentials. And in this current market, that's pretty darn rare. There's only one other outfit sort of doing what we're doing. And so if you are interested in data to really easily onboard and verify who your customers are, if you're interested in payment capabilities that allow you to collect revenue as well as remove back office operation issues, then that's the conversation we invite.
Fascinating, and we may have to have another chat. I'm curious about the confirmation of identity, piece as we move into a world of sort of wanting to do more of these sorts of things digitally. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we are relying on the bank KYC data, and so as you know, you can't easily change your bank KYC data. And where we're getting a lot of demand is, hey, if we connect them to their bank accounts, can you pre-populate all this information we need? And we've seen in some of the use cases overseas and what we've been looking at, an increasing conversion up to 40% of customers onboarding.
That's pretty handy.
It's not bad.
Anyone wants to drive up their conversions. So yeah, that's good. And so from a consumer perspective, what's really the key benefit for consumers to be using BlinkPay?
Yeah, so in terms of the auto pay solution, so we put it as a modern replacement to direct debits. With a direct debit, it's sometimes it feels like the stealthy hand that drains your account when you least expect it. With auto pay, and some folks say to us, "Hey, Adrian, you're giving them a lot of control. What if they just stop paying us? Then what?" And that's ultimately what it is. As a customer or consumer in New Zealand, all the open banking standards seeks to do is give more control back to you, the individual. And for us, auto pay, that's where you get to, if you can set out a payment setting, like how much are you willing to send per payment within a frequency, within a period. If you're doing request to pay, sometimes you've lost that bill, you've misfiled your email. If someone called you, say, "Hey, can you just send the bill to me while I'm on my phone now? I'm out and about right now. Like I'm out and about. Can you just send it so I can approve in my banking app?" Cool, we can do that. Absolutely, we can do that. And so it's trying to give more control and choice back to Kiwis so they can pay on their own terms in a way that makes the most sense to them. That's what we're trying to do. And we're also trying to cut down the cost of that.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It's been great to catch up and to sort of, I guess, delve into where we are now, because a lot of water's gone under the bridge, particularly from that open banking perspective. So great to fill in the picture, and exciting to see that things are continuing to move at pace for you with BlinkPay.
They are, Paul, and there's more to come. I can't really talk about it today, but I noticed you picked up the story around instant payments that we did pre-Christmas and then the recent Business Desk article. Suffice to say, we're very, very close to releasing publicly what we've managed to achieve, but watch this space.
Instant pay sounds exciting. You might be able to live up to the name of BlinkPay.
Blink and pay.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we'll look forward to hearing how that progresses. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, a big thank you to our show partners: Gorilla Technology, Spark, Fortinet, Workday, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. And look, if you've been listening to the audio, do make sure you're following us also on video platforms, the likes of YouTube, and we also do publish on LinkedIn under NZ Tech Podcast, and also some things under my name, so you can follow on that front as well. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.